all these industries are facing extreme stress. If they are forced to implement the plan, the subject matter is over. What they will do? If the assets have been eroded to such an extent that their value, which is 50% after the COVID, which was 100% at the time when the COC approved the plan, then something has to be done. So this jurisprudence, at another webinar, I also mentioned, I think Dr. Chaudhary was there, that a new jurisprudence has to develop, which must be on talking term with justice. If you view the opinion expressed by the Ahmedabad bench by referring to the RBI circular during COVID, then I think that view might need to be considered favorably, because Dr. Manorama, who is the author of the judgment, she has referred extensively to the RBI circular issued during COVID period, and to cover the COVID period and the concession given during the COVID period. So if that is the position of the RBI circular, then something has to be done so that the resolution plan may become workable. To sweep it under the carpet that the commercial wisdom of the COC is not to be gone into. If you read the judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of Shashidhar, I think the concept of commercial wisdom has been K. Shashidhar versus Indian Overseas Bank, 2019, volume 12, SEC 150, para 52, 55 to 58. So the Supreme Court has emphasized that the legislature has not endowed the adjudicating authority or the appellate authority with the power of judicial review of commercial wisdom of the COC. Now, what is the commercial wisdom is a very big question. In one case, the COC refused to open the resolution plan, and the bench of NCLT said that it is commercial wisdom. I thought that refusal to even open the resolution plan would not involve any commercial wisdom. It is just a ministerial act. The plan is yet to be examined. It remains under the wraps. Under the sealed cover, it was kept. The gentleman has come to the NCLT with declared that I am slightly late because of COVID. Condone my delay. Direct COC to consider my plan also, because the other plans are also being considered. They said, never mind about submission of resolution plan belatedly, even expression of interest, if it is late by some time, you cannot come forward, we will not allow you. The timeline is that strict. So the resolution, the ministerial act of opening the plan has been treated as a commercial wisdom. Can that be considered as a commercial wisdom? So friends, the view of the appellate tribunal is absolute shut up. NCLT various benches have taken the view that yes, in given circumstances, withdrawal is also possible, modification is also possible. Supreme Court is seized of the matter. What is the commercial wisdom is another question. And with these opening words, I express my gratitude to Mr. Madan and all the panelists for giving me patient hearing because so far I have been giving patient hearing. Today, you have granted me patient hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Justice Kumar, for your opening remarks. Friends, that was the judicial viewpoint, though nowadays Justice Kumar is working as an independent practitioner and arbitrator. But still, I consider in whatever he says, that's the voice of the bench. Now, I come to the voice of the bar. I come to Dr. UK Chaudhary. And like me, Dr. UK Chaudhary, sir, हमारा view तो एक ही रहेगा. If we are representing the COC, we'll say the plan cannot be withdrawn. And if we represent the resolution applicant, we'll say the plan can be withdrawn. But today you have to take an independent professional view that what according to you and as per law also, whether this plan can be withdrawn or not. Dr. Chaudhary, please. Sir, please unmute. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Madan. Honorable Chief Justice M.M. Kumar, the former president of NCLT, my very dear co-panelists, Ishan Madan as an initiator, and the elder Madan as a moderator. I thank all of them for this webinar and on a very appropriate topic which has come under a lot of debate, lot of confusion, and lot of discussion is going around because of the recent judgments of the Honorable Appellate Authority. So let me deal quickly in my opening remarks. I will not take any other question or their answers, but there are 3 stages where the resolution plan comes for consideration. The first stage is when it is placed to the resolution professional, and the resolution professional with his comments and opinion place it before the COC. Now, COC is not a private body accepting an offer. It's a statutory body created by a statute for the functions of the statute. And therefore, the first stage has no legality as far as whether you consider as an offer to be accepted by COC or you do not consider as an offer to be accepted or rejected by the COC. That is the first stage. The second stage is when the COC actually accepts with or without modification, with or without negotiations, it accepts the resolution plan where it attains a finality as far as the COC is concerned. And the third stage is when it is placed before the National Company Law Tribunal for its approval. And there could be 2 stages in that situation also. One, before an order of sanction or approval is passed under Section 31. And first stage is when it is withdrawn even before the Section 31 order is passed, though there is an application pending for consideration before the National Company Law Tribunal. Now, personally speaking, the first 2 stages have no recognition of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. There is nothing in the code as far as the first stage and the second stage. And I have my own doubts, like the judicial wisdom of Justice Kumar, that whether even the second stage, where the COC accepts the offer, whether it's a binding contract for the purpose of the Indian contract. I have my own doubts because the COC is not accepting this offer because there was some kind of a pre-offer made by them. The pre-offer comes from the corporate debtor through the insolvency resolution professional, and it doesn't come through the COC. Therefore, I have my own doubt that there is an offer, counter offer, and therefore an acceptance as required by the Indian Contract Act. So first stage and second stage, according to me, have no recognition of IB code, at least. Forget about the Indian Contract Act and some other promises to be accepted and rejected, and whether there could be somebody can be sued for a breach of a contract and compensation can be asked for, is a very far-fetched question, which has not, till date at least, not arisen in any of the cases between the COC and the prospective resolution applicant. The third stage, where COC approves, application is pending. I have again no doubt that once the COC approves it, but there is no sanction of law under section 31, still there is a lot of doubts that whether that scheme has become binding on all the stakeholders, including the resolution applicant. The only crucial stage where the present judgment will come into the picture will be the stage where a seal of approval is granted by the National Company Law Tribunal, saying that we do not find anything offensive in the resolution plan violating any part of section 30, particularly including section 32. If once that approval comes from, whether after that is it still open for a resolution applicant to say, either I was misled by the memorandum of information, the facts and figure given in the memorandum of information are absolutely, I find them unreliable when I go and take over the possession of the corporate data. Second could be that there is an absolute change of circumstances between the seal of approval and the resolution applicant trying to implement the resolution plan as approved by. There could be a sea of change between the 1 month's time, 2 months' time, 3 months' time. You do not know what kind of a disastrous something can happen, which may completely make the scheme unworkable as far as the resolution applicant is concerned. So that is the stage where the resolution applicant has been completely tied down by the Honorable Appellate Authority with number of judgments, particularly the judgments which have recently come into play is Kundan Care Products and Educom Solutions. Now, both these judgments have very clearly said that there is no question of the resolution applicant being permitted to withdraw once the COC has approved it and application has been filed and it is pending for consideration. And worst come that if it has already been sanctioned by the National Company Law Tribunal, then certainly there is no question of it not implementing. If you are not implementing the duly approved resolution plan, it's a blatant violation of section 74, and therefore the prosecution can be launched against such a resolution applicant refusing to implement the approved resolution plan within the meaning of section 31 read with 74. And you know that under section 236(2), the power to launch this kind of a prosecution lies either with the central government or it lies with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. So either way, only two agencies can only go for a prosecution before a special court under section 74 if the approved resolution plan by the National Company Law Tribunal is not implemented by the resolution applicant. Now I come to my personal view that what will happen if suppose the resolution plan as approved either is not matching with the facts and circumstances as disclosed in the expression of interest or in the memorandum of information prepared by the resolution professional. I have at least attended 2 cases where the information in the memorandum of information completely went haywire when the actually, for example, I give a very small example that the licensed capacity of the plants was given something, let us say about 3 lakh tons capacity per annum. But when the resolution applicant goes to take physical possession of the plants, at the time of working out the scheme is found out that it is the whole capacity is not more than 65,000 tons per annum. Now a difference between 65,000 tons per annum and 3.5 lakhs per annum is make lot of difference between the implementability of the resolution plan approved or not. So what the Honorable NCLT should do if these kind of circumstances are brought? In another case, I have come to know that there was in the memorandum of information a very clear statement made that this machine worth about more than $57 million have been implemented and installed at the manufacturing plant. But when he goes and takes over physically, it find out that neither the machine is there, machine is lying packed. I do not know, the packing was not opened, that whether the machine is the same as set out in the memorandum of information, but certainly it was not completely installed even in the premises. It was lying in the premises of some other company, not even the corporate data. Now, there are therefore these kind of circumstances that can you, by some force of interpretation of 31, say that when it says that it's binding on all the stakeholders, does it means absolutely binding that there is no exception to it? I do not think that in law there is something which by interpretation could lead to a situation where there is an absolute seal of approval that under no circumstances, good, bad or indifferent, that you cannot walk out on the resolution plan. Now, taking this kind of a complete adamant stand is contrary to all principles of interpretation of the statute. There can never be a section or an interpretation on a section which will be so absolute that under no circumstances there is ever an exception created. Because if this would have been the cases, then there would have been no interpretation of frustration of contracts or even the decrees of the court becoming unimplementable, that is the impractical for the purpose of the implementation of the decree or orders of the court. And there are not one, two, but there are hundreds of judgments right from the Privy Council up to House of Lords, including the High Courts in India and the Supreme Court of India, saying that a substantial change in the circumstances can make even a decree or the order of the court completely frustrated, and even the decree cannot be implemented. There are a number of them. We can, if necessary, even give the judgments. Therefore, I am not, this confusion which is now created by the judgments making the section 31 absolute is, I think, a very undesired interpretation of section 31. And that is the reason that ultimately the law, which will be binding on all the tribunals or subordinate courts, will be only the decision of the Honorable Supreme Court, which becomes binding under Article 141 of the Constitution of India. Now, short of that, we can only debate and discuss that is there a desirability of this kind of an interpretation of 31. Personally speaking for myself and taking the view that there is nothing in section 31 which says that once a scheme, it is binding on all persons, including a resolution applicant. But it certainly, there is nothing in the section which says that it goes out of the judicial purview of even the National Company Law Tribunal or an appellate authority, that in the given facts and circumstances of the case, that a no exception created even when it requires to be let us see it from another practical example. Suppose that we take the view that even the Honorable Supreme Court says that 31 is absolute and therefore there is no scope for a withdrawal. But practically speaking, the resolution applicant, who is now the owner of the corporate debtor, he has come to a conclusion that come whatever may, I'm doing my best to implement, but it can't be implemented. But I'm still doing my best to implement, and therefore the company is not revived. It's not rehabilitated. Now, it is not an offense that if you are doing your best, you are paying the money, you are investing the money, but the company still cannot produce the necessary results in a positive sense, that somebody has to say that the company is fully now rehabilitated or it's completely revived. If that is the situation, what will happen to the corporate data? It will again go back to the same stage, that somebody will again file an IBC. It will then again be taken for a resolution plan. If resolution plan fails after 1 year, it will again go to the winding up or the liquidation. Now, if that is the end result of the non-implementability of an approved sanction plan, I see that there is nothing in section 31 to take this kind of an unreasonable interpretation of section 31, and therefore I'm in complete agreement with Justice Kumar that there has to be, in some given facts and circumstances. What will be the given facts and circumstances? It is for the tribunal to decide. It is for the appellate tribunal to decide. It is for the Honorable Supreme Court to decide eventually that whether the circumstances are good enough to create an exception and permit a resolution applicant to withdraw, even from the sanction plan. So speaking for myself, I would like to have a balanced approach in the interpretation of section 31, where most of the time it should be treated as a binding on all stakeholders, but in certain given facts and circumstances of the case, there should be a circumstances which permit an exception to be created. Maybe it is only 0.5%, maybe it is 1%, maybe it is 10%, depending upon how many such cases will come in the facts and circumstances of the case, including a force majeure clause, which sometimes leaves no scope for this understanding that contracts can be frustrated, orders can be frustrated, decrees can be frustrated, and even the human efforts can be frustrated. If that is the situation in law already recognized, I see that something is required to be done. Let us hope. Appeals are already pending in number of cases. And I hope so that what we personally believe would be that what the Honorable Supreme Court also believes, that yes, there is no absolutism in the law. There is no absolute interpretation of a section where there is no exception whatsoever, or not even worth considering, can be the circumstances in which section 31 read with 33 or 32 can be taken into consideration. We will come, Mr. Madan, to question and answers relating to the modification, relating to the increase in timeline, relating to the contingency of the terms and conditions. That is beside the point that we are taking for discussion is the withdrawal of the resolution plan. But if the participants come to that and they want our opinion on any such issues, we will take them up where the question and answer session comes. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for such a lively topic and giving me the opportunity to share my personal views with most of the participants and my panelists too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chaudhary, for raising so many issues. And now I'm of the view that till the time there is any specific provision in the code, now there are two situations that COC will always say that there is no provision in the law which allows withdrawal of a resolution plan, and resolution applicant will always say that there is no provision in the law which prohibits withdrawal of the resolution plan. So till the time there is no specific provision is there, this fight will continue, or till the time the law is settled down ultimately by Supreme Court of India. And moreover, then, sir, you raise other issues also. I'll come to those questions later on presence of force majeure clause or doctrine of impossibility. I'll come to those questions also in Q&A session. Now I come to Mr. Sanjeev Pandey. Mr. Pandey, being a banker, a lender, financial creditor, member of COC, as well as member of monitoring committee, how do you view this withdrawal of a resolution plan by a resolution applicant, particular successful resolution applicant? Mr. Sanjeev, please. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Madan. And Chief Justice Kumar, and my respectable colleagues here on the panel. My views are purely commercial. I have been handling commercial credit for almost more than 30 years. So what is the resolution plan basically? As I see it, it is basically a business proposal. And why a resolution applicant comes forward to submit a plan? Because he don't want to invest time, energy, effort, and so much money into a greenfield venture. Like you take the case of Essar Steel. ArcelorMittal was trying to set up a plant for so many years in India, and he could not succeed. Ultimately, he got a golden chance that there is a running unit of almost 5-6 million ton capacity, steel, integrated steel plant available for sale, where in case he is able to bid that for that and he is able to take over, he will be saving almost 10 years of a time period required to set up this kind of a plant. And all the hassles of getting government approvals, land, and electricity connections, road connections, all these matters are taken care of. So that's why a resolution applicant comes forward with a plan. Now, as we have seen in the case of so many CIRPs, very few plans have come. Most of the cases have gone into liquidation. That also gives us some clear idea of what business looks for in a CD undergoing CIRP. So they look for some value and they do some kind of due diligence. And on that basis of due diligence, they have certain assumptions. They do some valuations. They have some costs calculations. There are some risk analysis, and a time is a big factor. They have the timelines in mind. Keeping all these things in mind, the RA prepares a resolution plan. So it is nothing but a brownfield business proposal, not a greenfield proposal. So here, when he comes in and he submits the plan to COC, so first stage is, as we said, that is the stage of COC, deliberating on the plan. So that I feel it's an open stage. A person has come in with a plan. During the course of deliberation, he comes across some information which says that your due diligence was not complete and there is some laxity in the information available. So whatever assumptions, valuation I have made, they are not exact. So I may be a loser in case I bid for the plan. He decides to back out. So I don't think there is no bar in the law or in IBC which stops him from backing out. So that is one stage. Then at the second stage, it is basically, if you look at the IBC, it is entirely a market-oriented law. So whatever valuation we do today, whatever the condition of assets is today, whatever risk assumptions are there, they are not static. In a dynamic market, all these things are changing. And as we have seen in the COVID situation, suddenly all those plans which were before NCLTs for adjudication, suddenly they lost a lot of value. Suddenly there was change in parameters. So in those kind of cases which are approved by the COC and placed before NCLT, suddenly some situation happens where suddenly the value of the asset as assessed by the applicant, because there are two valuations. If you look at the plan, one valuation is done by the valuer, who is appointed by COC or the RP, and that is kept secret till the time of resolution plan. And second valuation is done by the applicant. And normally the deal comes when the applicant's value is higher than the liquidation value. Although the Supreme Court has clarified, it can be below the value also. So now this valuation has taken a sudden turn and it has gone down. Estimates are maybe 20-30% in some cases maybe 50%. So here, for a businessman, he is coming here for a profit motive, business motive. He is not coming here for charity. He is no social purpose here. He is not here to support the jobs of so many employees. No. We should be clear in our mind that a businessman is purely oriented towards profit. And he will stick to the plan as long as he is confident of making money out of that deal. So when he sees that suddenly market change, he will approach the NCLT. Sir, the things have changed and I would like to withdraw. My view is that here the COC and the NCLT should give a relook at the plan and also hear him out, because again, there is a possibility of protecting the plan by allowing him to bid again. Like he has submitted a plan for X amount. The COC can allow him to, okay, you revisit the plan, come back with a revised plan. We will again deliberate. If found okay, then we'll again submit to him. That is one possibility. Although law is silent on that. But my view is that this is very much possible. Law is economic law. It has to be flexible, cannot be absolutist. So this is very much possible in the law. And last stage, as we have seen, is the post-approval. Recently, IBBI made some changes in the regulation. And they have, I think, it's a smart move, because they have taken care of this situation where one of the applicant backs out and suddenly the company or the CD is forced into liquidation, or rather compulsory liquidation. So IBBI says, no, now you can accept more than one plan. So COC can deliberate maybe 2 plans or 3 plans, and they can approve the plans in the order of 1, 2, and 3, maybe more. So in case in some CIRP, more than one plan are available, and all the plans are approved in the priority, and the priority number 1 RA backs out, he submits a withdrawal, I don't think there should be any problem. The NCLT should seek the recommendation of COC for the next plan. That should be possible, and that is the what market orientation of code is. Because unless the applicant has his heart and soul in the plan, he can violate the plan anytime, you see, because code says if any of the stakeholder violates the plan, the CD goes into liquidation. So it is actually giving an opening to all of them. If one of the financial creditor want to frustrate the plan, he can stop his part of the deal. Similarly, RA also, in case he want to withdraw the plan, post-approval, he doesn't have to do anything. He just stop implementing the plan. He will stop making payments or do something else to violate the plan, and it gets frustrated. So why should we go to the court and withdraw? I don't think there is a necessity. It is an automatic liquidation. And the maximum loss he can bear is the loss of performance guarantee or the bid bond money he has deposited, as we have seen in the case of MTech Auto. The RA backed out comfortably, and nothing can be done, because ultimately it is the businessman, and businessman is run by the profit motive, and it is the basic fundamental of business that you cannot put good money after bad money. Businessman has to cut his losses whenever he comes across the situation where now I have started booking a loss. Now he has to cut down his losses. So no law or no IBC can force him to continue with a loss-making unit. I don't think it is commercially possible or thinkable. And last thing I would like to say, that very important aspect of the code or a resolution plan is viability and feasibility, which is of course established by the COC. Now this viability and feasibility of a plan, I don't think it is a static concept. Viability and feasibility is a dynamic concept. It depends on certain parameters, certain timelines. One plan was submitted before NCLT in 2018. Still, it is being deliberated by NCLT in 2020. Why should you think that RA, he is moral bound to support that plan? He is a businessman. He could have thought that it is IBC. It says 330 days. Maybe I'll add, say, another 80 days or 90 days. So maybe 400 days, say 1.5 years, 18 months. I'll get my unit. He has calculated the cost during that period. His inputs and his all assumptions, his valuations, it will remain static for that kind of period. Now, if the adjudicating authority is sitting on that plan for 2 years, I don't think it is reasonable to expect that gentleman to still continue with the plan just because law says, no, 31, section 31, it is binding. It is binding, in my view, only to the extent that in case he violates, the CD goes into liquidation. Other than that, I think we have to take an open view. Business has to be done as business, not as a charity or a public service. So keeping that in mind, I am of the view that at all stages, a withdrawal of a plan should be possible and should be facilitated. Only situation where it should be discouraged is that deliberately some RA has come in and he has created situation, he has excluded all other RAs and captured this unit and now deliberately is bringing it to liquidation, then that should be curtailed through section 74 or whatever regulations. Other than that, if it is purely on the business, sound business principles, he's backing out, I think that decision should be respected and supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjeev. I'm really delighted to have your views, I tell you. I was thinking of some opposite views from your side, but I'm really delighted to have your views, very, very practical views on this side. Now, over to Dr. Mamta.
Progressive banker. Progressive banker.
Yes.
Congrats.
So that is why he's looked upon by other bankers, I tell you, sir.
Yes.
In his individual capacity as a banker. So, Dr. Mamta, today I'm not raising this issue before you as an advocate, but as an insolvency professional.
Yes.
Will you be on the side of the resolution applicant or on the side of the COC? And simultaneously, I'm raising a question also to you. Well, let's come to the question mode also. That if a plan comes to you and the plan is having this clause that if the plan is not approved by the adjudicating authority within a period of 6 months from the date of approval of the COC, then this plan shall be treated as withdrawn or the RA shall be having a liberty to withdraw that plan. How would you see this plan? Will you take up this plan to RA? Will you say that this, so to COC, will you say this plan is 32 compliant plan? So I'm raising two issues. Number one, your opening remarks along with a reply to this question as an insolvency professional.
Thank you. At the foremost, let me do the honors. I respectfully greet and pay my respects to Justice M.M. Kumar. Sir, thank you so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure to learn from you, know from you, and also see you on the screen, if not physically possible. Thank you so much, sir. Dr. UK Chaudhary sir, I'm also the past president of ICSI, but I've always looked upon you with awe, the kind of contribution and the kind of upliftment that you've done to the profession, not only at the time when you were the president, but even today by your demeanor is par excellence. So thank you so much for being on the panel. And GP Madan Saab, thank you for this opportunity. It means a lot to me. And Ishan is just rocking the floor all the time that I see him. Each time that I see him and really see the way he's working so hard, he's an inspiration to many, I'm sure. Ishan, keep up the great work. And Sanjeev ji, I've dealt with him in IBBI, and even today when I see him as a banker, I think he's only growing from strength to strength. His views has always been very pragmatic, let me tell you. Even when he was in IBBI, he was one person whom we always said that probably he's the person who's come with some steering stuff, because he's so different from the others. So Sanjeev ji, it's an honor to be with you. Madan, the question that you asked me, I'll be honestly deliberating on it and say that a plan which comes with conditions precedent, that's a CP plan, will definitely not find my approval while I take it to the COC. And if I have to take it to the COC, then I'll have owned my carve-outs that, look, this is a plan with CP. So in my career as a resolution professional, as an advocate, I've seen that a plan which comes with CP and too many prayers, does not find favor neither with the COC and nor with the adjudicating authority. Now, sometimes we see that there are no much choices available with the COC, and especially in these trying times, we are seeing that hardly plans are coming by. Like I'm handling cases and seeing that getting a plan is like, worshipping the God and finding him in front of you, really blessing you. It's like that, getting a plan these days. And once you get a plan, you just don't want to, leave it. It's like, if you're getting married at a late age and if you're getting a good partner, you don't want to leave the partner because you don't know you are going to get it later or not. So it is like that, we just don't want to clutch it and just hold on to it tightly. But the COC is very wary with a plan which has too many conditions and which has too many prayers. My experience has shown that COP, that's conditions precedent, never gets passed by the COC. So if a clause like this comes that, 6 months, 3 months, etc., probably the COC will say that no, adjudicating authority is not in my control. Everything else, I can control the RP at times, I can control the process at times by fastening up the things, but adjudicating authority, we cannot. Let me tell you my own exposure, Justice Kumar and Chaudhary Saab, in one of my own case, which is a very, very large case, it runs into 9,000 to 10,000 case. rupee case, crores rupee case. So then what has happened is the resolution plan got approved. Now there was one out of the 36 disgruntled financial creditors, big and small, there was one disgruntled creditor who moved first the NCLT, and then the NCLT, saying that the plan is discriminatory. Just one sentence, Okay, discriminatory plan. Justice Kumar is smiling his way. He knows that, the onus is on the other side to prove that it is not discriminatory. I have made my point that it is discriminatory in nature. Now you keep on dragging with that case. And there is one small judgment that comes from NCLT that whatever happens will be subject to my order. Now, with that single line, subject to my order, the applicant, who in this case is one of the disgruntled financial creditor, keeps on saying that there's a stay in the plan. That one sentence does so much of ripples, So he says that there's a stay in the plan. Believe you me, sirs, for 1.5 years, this plan, after the approval of adjudicating authority, is still in the lobby and in the staircase. It's still in the waiting room. The plan has not got implemented. Now, the funniest part is that the RA comes forward and puts her application in the NCLAT saying that I want to withdraw the plan. Why? Because in all these 1.5 years, so much water has flown down the river that now if I take up the plan, I don't find value at all. Now, this is a peculiar case, and I really request your indulgence in this. There's no stay. The RA takes probably a convenient way of handling it, and by saying that there is a stay because of that one-liner. Okay, and here there is a lot of time that goes by in hearing the matters and coming out with orders, which will have a palpable effect. Now, in such a circumstance, Madan, you tell me, even without a plan which is having a CP, a corporate just gets stuck because of the rigmaroles of law. I can't say judiciary. I don't have that. Mere andar utni himmat nahi hai that I can say that. But at times I've really felt that going with Sanjeev ji's, I'm just trying to continue that. It's really high time that we as a force need to actually also lend our voice to the judiciary and say that these are all commercial matters. And commercial matters, after a given point in time, it is so dynamic that today and tomorrow is no same. Today and tomorrow is no equal to. So therefore, if the circumstances change, there is bound for people to come forward and say, hello, I'm bidding adieu to the plan. So I am myself very perturbed with the speed, the snail pace that we are moving towards as far as the resolution plans are concerned. Secondly, in law, Madan, I think we're also talking on the lawful aspects. There's a case of all the three lords from the heaven has shown us a case of Shiv Ram Krishna Prasad versus the OL, where all the lords have said that even if the COC has approved a plan and is pending adjudicating authorities' approval, even then the COC may say that, hey, I am now withdrawing that plan. I've got a better plan maybe. So if the COC is permitted to say, hello, I'm doing a bye-bye to the plan because of whatever reasons, then why the RA can't do it? Yes, the RA should have very genuine and palpable reasons, and that is the reason why we have the source of adjudicating authority carving out or trying to see that what is palpable, what is correct. Is he trying to just make a motive out of the law, or is he actually really aggrieved? So the point that I'm trying to drive home is twofold. One, it's very risky to have such a kind of opinion, because every now and then, more so, there will be applications of withdrawal, or maybe there will be applications of actually a modification in the plan. So, somebody who just enters the house also should understand that when you are buying the house, you are buying it on as is, where is, no recourse basis. So what Mr. UK Chaudhary said, I totally agree that, once he goes, the information in the IM was ABC to that extent of whatever written in the IM. And all of a sudden, when he goes inside, he finds even the machine pack is not open, leave alone getting installed in the factory. But Chaudhary Saab, with all humility, that man should have done his own due diligence. He should have gone to the factory. He should have seen it. So in all the IMs that everybody prepares as a professional, they always have a disclaimer that, look, this is what we have found out. Because in most of the cases, I must humbly put in before your lords and before your good selves, that most of the times, believe you me, the promoters don't assist. Though in the law, you have the force of the law for the promoters to assist the RP, but we all understand that in 88% to 90%, there's no coordination and there's no support. So the RP or the IRP tries to dig out some, whatever they get, and they try to put all the puzzles together so that at least you have something in front of you to look back. But that will just not mean that the buyers beware. It's the market of buyers being beware. So like we say that in law of limitation, if somebody is sleeping over their rights, you cannot just say that, hey, I've now waken up as a phoenix and you look at me. So therefore here in this case also, the buyers beware market, you have to, like in SARFAESI, like here, one has to do the complete due diligence on a no recourse basis. And we'll have to find out whether I want to enter that or not, because nobody has put a gunpoint on their head and said, you have to buy my plan. No, that's not the case. So once a person commits, people say marriages are made in heaven. I'm saying that these deals are made on earth. So some sanctity has to be there when it is a deal. So contract, no contract, Indian Contract Act, binding, no binding. But when you have done an entire process, at the end of it, you can't say that now I'm retracting unless there's a force majeure or there are some unforeseen circumstances. I'll rest my case here, Madan, and I'll come back with anything that comes by. But that is what I wanted to say as an opening remark. And thanks once again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Mamta. Now your last sentence was on force majeure, and my next question is starting from that. So far as my screen goes, I was on clockwise. Now I'm going anti-clockwise, and I'll be raising this issue to Mr. Sanjeev Pandey, then to Dr. UK Chaudhary, and then Justice Kumar. Same question. Mr. Pandey, how do you view this presence of this force majeure clause or doctrine of impossibility or doctrine of frustration, or some term like extraordinary circumstances beyond the control of the resolution applicant like this? How do you view these terms in a resolution plan while considering this plan at COC level?
Yeah, again, as I said earlier, so basically the plan is a business proposal. So as any business proposal has to take care of unforeseen circumstances. So here he's coming with some kind of protection in case of COVID-like situation happens again in future. So I think the lenders have to, or COC has to accept this kind of clauses in the resolution plan. A force majeure is the thing which is in already. So after this COVID scare, I think in future most of the plans will have this force majeure clause, and we have to accept it. That is my view.
And we have seen this presence of force majeure clause, rather invoking this clause by DVI in case of MTech Auto recently.
Yes.
Dr. Chaudhary, your views please on this. Please unmute. Please, sir, please unmute.
My views are the same as my progressive banker friend is saying, that force measure is a force measure. Mm-hmm. You just can't exclude, and it's a settled law, that there are certain circumstances which you can't deal with as a human being. The act of God is far, 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 far more superior than the act of human beings. And therefore, a force measure is a force measure. You have to accept that no businessman would like to expose himself against all the circumstances in the world. Therefore, all kind of contingencies which makes the scheme unviable. I will just comment just one thing which Dr. Mamta has said, so that please see the practicability, that between the memorandum of information and the RA putting up the scheme, in a company like which has 16 plants in India and 39 plants outside India, is it possible to have a due diligence in every plant within a period of 15 days or 20 days or 25 days? Therefore, my business exigency is, as Mr. Pandey says, that I wanted to cut short the acquisition. I don't want to get into the licensing raj. I wanted to have an operational plant. I don't want to waste my 8 years in putting up the plant together. I wanted to have the economies of the scale. Therefore, these are my all business exigencies. Therefore, I'll say, hell with due diligence. Let me at least apply so that at least I should not miss the deadline. Please see the deadline. What a pressurizing deadline the IBC has fixed up. 10 days for this, 15 days for this, 30 days for this, 35 days for this. You just can't have a due diligence. A good due diligence, in my personal opinion and my 42 years experience, takes sometimes years. And I'm not exaggerating. It takes years for a good due diligence, even on acquisition on an international scale. Therefore, to pin down a resolution applicant to say, oh, you should have done your own legal due diligence is, I think, something which is completely unacceptable to the law if the circumstances point the other way around. Therefore, there has to be an exception created in the business-like circumstances. After all, we are not in a contract of marriage here. That it's so sacred that with 7 years, 10 years, 15 years litigation, you can't have a divorce. We are in a business relationship. We must have as quickly a divorce as possible. And that's where the beauty of this law lies, that you are cutting short every possible way to acquire a business enterprise. Therefore, there should be an equal side, that you should also be able to exit the business enterprises as quickly as you can acquire it. And that's where the beauty of this law lies. Therefore, my circumstances and my personal opinion is the same, that no, there has to be an exception. You can't take so much of rigid view and so much of adamancy in law, because please see that even the Supreme Court, what it says today, is not absolute or final. You have seen in the law of company law, you have seen in the law of arbitration, you are seeing it daily in the law of bail and capital punishments. Every day, law is dynamic. It has to change. It has to change to cater to the needs of the people and the society from time to time. Therefore, I am in complete agreement with Mr. Pandey and with Justice Kumar that there has to be the circumstances always. Leave it, of course, to the NCLT, that which will be the best circumstances which permit a person to exit. Don't lay down such a rigid law that under no circumstances on earth you can't exit a business enterprise. This is, I think, little too much. Let us hope that good sense will prevail somewhere. If not here, then in the Supreme Court. If not one bench of the Supreme Court, a larger bench of the Supreme Court. If not a larger bench, then even a full bench of the Supreme Court. We will see the reason somewhere and logic somewhere coming, because the judiciary also keep changing.
Yeah.
The law laid down by the Supreme Court itself is not static. It's also dynamic. It changes with the passage of time.
Madan,
therefore, my take is the same force measure is there to stand.
Yes.
You shouldn't have given me the hat of RP to wear. That was not fair on your part.
I want to have the views of Justice Kumar on this. And sir, I'm just extending this query. Can this force majeure be implied in a contract or maybe particularly in the resolution plan? Suppose this is not specifically mentioned there, can it be implied?
Thank you, Ms. Madan. See, there is a statutory recognition to force majeure clause in the sense that the law of contract under section 56 recognize frustration. Frustration is in a way the force majeure clause. This is statutory recognition, but otherwise that would be force majeure ordinarily is found in contracts. See, there is a concept under the law of contract, fundamental breach of contract. There are two cases reported in 1965 Supreme Court. In West Bengal, in Calcutta, near Calcutta, there is a village, Dhulia. Mamta would be aware. The village Dhulia is at such a location where the river Ganges would keep on changing its course. So the villager would keep on insuring their houses against floods. Now villagers have insured their houses. It was unusually heavy monsoon season and floods were well in sight. Insurance company realizing that they will have to pay huge amount because the houses are going to be swept away by the fury of flood. They cancelled the insurance contract by relying on a clause by giving 2 weeks notice. Calcutta High Court held that it is a fundamental breach what you have undertaken to do if you also undertake not to do by virtue of the contractual clause in the printed standard form agreement, then such a clause is a useless clause. So once there is a fundamental breach, you will not be permitted to rely upon a clause of giving notice of 2 weeks or 30 days and wriggle out of your obligation of paying insurance money because the floods are well in sight. No other insurance company would come forward and insure the houses. But unfortunately, Justice Hidayatullah, who later became Chief Justice, relying on a dictum of Chief Justice B. Mount of Bombay High Court, 1937, stated that once the parties have entered into an agreement, the court's role is over, unless there is ambiguity in the terms of the agreement. But later on, these two judgments, other judgment is from Punjab, Amritsar, something very similar. So later on, this law has been overruled, as Mr. Chaudhary was suggesting, that the law is dynamic. It cannot be static. Therefore, as I said in the beginning, if the subject matter of the resolution plan itself is eroded to the extent that it is not recognizable, a subject matter which was worth, say, 100 crore is not even 5 crore now, 10 crore. And Sanjeev has very rightly said, and something has to be done. It is complete frustration of the contract. There is a fundamental change. In fact, I authored a book which was published from London, and fundamental breach of contract chapter, in 2 chapters I have discussed. That the name of the book is Control of Exclusion Clauses in Standard Form Contracts.
Can you repeat it, sir?
It is available. I donated 2 copies to our library in NCLT, but it is out of print now. I may revise it sometime, but 85, it was published in 1985. So the fundamental, once there is a fundamental change, fundamental breach in marriage law, irretrievable breakdown of marriage. You see, jurisprudence recognizes this principle all over in every branch of law. As Dr. Chaudhary have rightly said, there cannot be any absolutism in law. Extremity has to be avoided. Justice Krishna Iyer used to say that law should be on talking terms with justice. A law which is not on talking terms with justice is a dry letter. It will result in injustice. So therefore, I support the view of Mr. Pandey. Commercial wisdom, as Supreme Court have said in the judgment of K. Shashidhar, commercial wisdom is not open to judicial scrutiny. Agreed. But commercial wisdom, if has resulted in such a erosion of assets, subject matter of the resolution plan, then if the law does not mold itself to come to the rescue of such a resolution applicant, the consequences are grave. After a year, after 2 years, the company, the same corporate debtor is going to be liquidated. What is the use of such an exercise? Therefore, it has to be recognized rigidity brings injustice. It is flexibility which can mold itself. Commercial wisdom, NCLT should not grab the power of the COC to apply its mind, as I said in the opening remarks. Once COC has applied its mind on commercial wisdom, ordinary circumstances, yes. I was Chief Justice in Jammu and Kashmir. Floods came in September 2014. And without surveyor report, I could not have awarded anything. But I passed a detailed order saying that houses are already, business premises are already in deep waters. Surveyor cannot submit their report before 48 months. The business houses, now flood water is receding. If they are not paid, so I ordered 50% of the insurance amount to be paid. And the order was upheld by Honorable Supreme Court. Justice Dattu was the then Chief Justice of India. The matter was placed before Justice Dattu's bench. SLP not even granted. So what I am saying is, in extraordinary circumstances, you may have to mold the law to meet justice, to meet equity. Otherwise, a law which does not answer justice, if to borrow the language of Justice Krishna here, if it is not on talking terms with justice, then it is a dry letter. It will lead to injustice. So I think force majeure may also be implied. Frustration may also be implied. All these things have to be implied in this public law area, where you see Taylor versus Taylor versus Caldwell. This is 1863. Doctrine of common law impossibility was coined in that judgment, which has been adopted by way of illustration under Section 56, where a dancer was to perform in a theatre gutted in fire, impossibility to do. So those type of things we have to invoke. A judge must have all the instrument in his armory to deal with injustice. So these instruments must be used by all the judges to correct, to balance and bring justice, instead of visiting the resolution applicant with injustices, which later on is also going to land in the same problem. So with these remarks, I would thank the panelists.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Your Lordship. Sir, on this particular issue of taking any action against this resolution applicant who is withdrawing the plan, what action can be taken and under which provision? Actually, I could see only one provision, that is Section 74, subsection 3. And that reads that where the corporate debtor, any of its officers or creditors or any person, it does not even uses the word resolution applicant.
Yes.
I'm reading it again. Where
Approve
the
the resolution
debtor, any of its officers, Section 74, subsection 3.
Yeah, where the corporate debtor, any of its officer or creditor, yes.
Or any person on whom the approved resolution plan is binding under Section 31, knowingly and willfully contravenes any of the terms of such resolution plan. The words have been used, knowingly and willfully. I think the mala fide or malicious intent has to be proved before you take any action against such a resolution applicant. And if under the
Mr.
current
Vedant, that is to be done only after the prosecution is launched.
and that shall be lodged as a special court.
You
not the
see,
official of the
special court, Now this Cuttack bench in Liberty case, Cuttack bench of the High Court, there where prosecution was launched by IBPI within the period of 15 grace days to deposit the upfront money by Liberty House. And the appellate tribunal allowed further time to deposit. Then Cuttack bench of the High Court said that IBPI must reconsider the withdrawal of prosecution, or if they reiterate the prosecution to go on, then what will be the impact, whether it would be cost or not. Liberty House was allowed to come back. See, there was a delay in depositing the upfront money. During the 15 days grace period, IBPI launched prosecution. In the meanwhile, Liberty House has gone to appellate tribunal. Appellate tribunal extended the time. They deposited the money. So the High Court said that we will not quash the proceedings, but IBPI may consider withdrawal at this stage because no useful purpose will be served. 74, as far as your question with regard to 74, subsection 3, mens rea. In civil cases, mens rea may have to be inferred if you have money in your account. If you have enough assets with you to deposit the money and you don't deposit, then unless there is any other explanation, intention has to be inferred in civil matters like this. So this is not mens rea to the extent in criminal cases. And the fine is rupee 1 lakh, should not be less than 1 lakh. Punishment should not be less than 1 year, and it may extend to 5 years. Very rigorous provision. And Liberty House in Auto MTech, and even before me in one of the cases, probably it was
Sir, Adhunik Metallics.
Yes, there also Liberty House has been, you see, now they are facing prosecution in the courts at Gurgaon. So the Liberty House is one entity which is facing this problem. So if there are multiple prosecutions being launched, it can also be evidence that look at this entity, they are behaving, rather misbehaving in every resolution plan. So it is knowingly or willfully. So it would be willfully and knowingly. So the 74(3) have to be read in that fashion. Otherwise, there would be no sanction, Mr. Madan. Everybody will walk in and walk out. It is not a free walk. It comes with a heavy penalty. There is no sanction then. And the commercial wisdom would be lost completely. One can come and deceive and go away.
Dr. Chaudhary, your views on this?
Certainly 74(3) is attracted because it says that any person on whom the approved plan is binding. So certainly the resolution applicant is the person on whom his own plan is binding. Therefore 74(3). But my question is bigger, that why you should have such a strict, except in the exceptional circumstances, as we have found out in some cases like Liberty House, where they have applied for, let us say, 6 resolution plan and they are withdrawing from all the 6 resolution plan. Therefore, the intention is very clear that you have just sabotaged the resolution plans and therefore you are just walking. And as Justice Kumar says, the walking is not free. The walking is also with some penalty. So you have to be prosecuted under 74(3), But 74(3) again either IBBI will do or the central government will do. How much case will be made out possibly by IBBI and the central government who are not involved either in the resolution plan, or they have not even considered that what the resolution plan was. They have to possibly read it like a prosecutor will read it. And that is how I'm not in favor that not in that each and every case, as the NCLAT now says in Kundan Care products, that you don't permit the withdrawal at all, and if they withdraw, then you prosecute them under 74(3) and file a prosecution. Now, this is what, according to me, in my personal opinion, is not acceptable to me as an interpretation of 74 read with 31. This is therefore my take on this, that prosecution of 74 only in very exceptional circumstances where the intention is very clear that you are knowingly and deliberately doing it. And it's a civil consequence. You need not to, of course, go into the mens rea like you do it in the criminal cases, because here the facts and circumstances of the case itself will prove whether you are doing it knowingly or you are not doing it knowingly. It's not so difficult to find out in the civil cases because the standards of evidence are not as punishing as the standards of evidence in the criminal cases. So looking from that point of view, I feel that we have to take a balanced approach somewhere. And that is what we are hoping.
My next question is to Justice Kumar before I hand over to Ishan. In this Ahmedabad bench judgment of in Wind World India, the resolution applicant has been granted permission to withdraw the plan. Simultaneously, there is a direction to the resolution professional to return the bank guarantee, which has been given in the form of performance security, within 10 working days of passing of this order. Now, this appeal can be preferred, say, in next 45 days. But the direction to be complied with by the resolution professional is within 10 days of passing of the order. Suppose this appeal is preferred after 30 days and he does not return this PG, bank guarantee, within 10 days, will it be treated as contempt of court on the part of the resolution professional?
You see, ordinarily, the period of limitation provided for appeal is excluded while considering an action under the Contempt of Courts Act. Under Section 420 of the Companies Act, contempt lies. So there, the Contempt of Courts Act 1971 has been adopted by incorporation. So even if within 10 days RP has not done it, and period of 45 days is provided for appeal actually preferred within 30 days.
At T plus 15.
Yes. Yes. So therefore, the case for contempt is not made out. But second aspect is, once such an order is there, then instead of waiting till the 44th day, 45th day to file appeal, the appeal should be preferred immediately in order to avoid any such doubt. But as a matter of law and principle, contempt case is not made out until and unless 45 days period is over. There is case law on this subject.
Thank you. I think, Ishan, majority of the questions that have already been addressed by the panelists during the discussion. But still, if you think there are 2-3 questions are pending, but they should be small. I've seen a couple of questions are very long. They're very lengthy, can't take up those questions. If you have seen that 2-3 questions are they're small in nature, you can take up those questions before we conclude this session.
Very well.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much to all the panelists. I think that was a fantastic discussion. I think we covered so much ground that ideally you won't even be able to cover this much ground in a setup of just experts alone. And I think it's been great. And thank you so much for that. Of course, there are many questions that have come up, but most of these questions have in a way been addressed by, especially by Justice Kumar and Dr. UK Chaudhary. And, the pragmatic views that Mr. Pandey gave, I think, again, covered and allayed a lot of concerns that a lot of stakeholders would also have. One question that I am rather devising based on a few questions that we've received here is about changes that occur between the information memorandum and when actual facts begin to surface. Now, if we just speak on the basis of fraud, I recollect a judgment of 2017, A.V. Papaya Sastry, I believe it was against state of Andhra Pradesh, which says that fraud vitiates everything. But what generally happens when, an RA acts on the basis of the information memorandum that's given to him? He then is bound by the resolution plan, the COC approves it, and later on the facts turn out to be absolutely not just different. There was one angle that Dr. Chaudhary mentioned that, the machinery is bad, nobody can install, nobody can do anything about it. But then there are facts that just completely differ from the information memorandum altogether. Like, those things did not even exist. What happens in such scenarios? Should RAB still be bound if he acted on the basis of certain misrepresentations that were given? And should he then be forced to proceed and act on the resolution plan that has been approved by COC? Dr. Chaudhary, would you like to take that up, please?
Yes, this is actually what happened in a very practical matter before the Chandigarh National Company Law Tribunal. And they find out that there was a lot of mismatch between the memorandum of information and the resolution plan which has been relied upon on the memorandum of information. And it was considered, there is a finding to say that yes, it has been a misrepresentation in the memorandum of information. Though according to me, it may be fraudulent also, but otherwise they said that since there is so much of mismatch that the resolution applicant has relied upon, there was some duty cast upon the resolution professional also not to make these kind of wild guesses relating to the capacity of the plant, relating to the plant and machinery, not even making an observation that where the plant and machinery is lying. And that is how the resolution plan was permitted to be withdrawn. Even if I don't go to the length of saying that there is a fraud in the whole thing, the very fact that there is a mismatch between the memorandum of information, which is supposed to be true and fair, if turned out to be not true and fair, then he has every right to say that, sorry, commercially, I have decided that I wanted to cut short the period of acquisition of such a good enterprise, commercial enterprise. But now I find out that I can't go ahead with my scheme because my whole plan is based upon a certain capacity or certain plant and machinery, which otherwise is available. And that is how that the most of the time, that is why I am taking the view that there cannot be anything absolute. Depending upon the facts and circumstances of each case, that at what stage and in what circumstances you are trying to exit. That is what is most important, and it must be left to the judicial wisdom of the National Company Law Tribunal or the appellate authority or eventually to the Honorable Supreme Court of India. And this has happened in most of the cases where even Justice Kumar has decided number of cases that yes, if I find out that the commercial viability of the project itself is lost, then how can I force somebody to go and implement that scheme? I think that there is a lot of judicial wisdom in that. Therefore, it should be left to each and every case. Don't lay down a complete adamant parameter that this can't be done. You can say this should be done. And in each case, the facts and circumstances should be appreciated correctly. And that is why that there is a court of original jurisdiction, there is a court of appellate jurisdiction, then there is a court of ultimate jurisdiction.
Yeah. Right.
That is why the rule of appeal is in place in most of the cases, that if there is some judicial wisdom has not been correctly applied, it can be corrected by the appellate court.
Dr. Chaudhary, even otherwise, if there is a misrepresentation, the concept of misrepresentation is recognized by the Contract Act. And under 30 subsection 2, if there is a plan which has contravened the provisions of any statute or any information given to a resolution applicant which has come in contravention of law of contract, I think you can bring it under 30 subsection 2 itself. We do need not to, you see, question the commercial wisdom. And the resolution professional at first place could not have given Form H, could not have filled up Form H certifying that the resolution plan is compliant with every law. Once it is in conflict with the memorandum of information, then it is a violative of law because there is misrepresentation. So it can be brought under 30 subsection 2 also. An advocate of your stature, I think, can easily push it under subsection 2, section 30. Because this is misrepresentation. See, I give you a very interesting story. In England, the law was that if you present a document, say a promissory note, then promissory note executed by the executor will be binding, and you cannot say that it contains 100 pounds or 1,000 pounds or 100,000 pounds. But in 1963, this law was overturned. They say, Lord Denning said that 100 pounds and 100,000 pounds would change the nature of the document and it will amount to misrepresentation merely because you have got signature of the executant by representing that it is 1,000 pounds, actually it is 100,000 pounds, would make a lot of dissonance, it would amount to misrepresentation. So the nature of the document, which was the earlier law, that would not be the conclusive factor. The amount filled in would amount to misrepresentation if it is 100 pounds or 100,000 pounds. And the documents would be voidable. A principle of non est factum could be invoked. So you see, law is not static, it is dynamic. House of Lords, 63, they changed their opinion which was prevailing. Earlier they were not able to. You see, because of even House of Lords could not have overruled itself. It was only in 1963 that judicial practices were issued and House of Lords started overruling itself. And in India, this law continued up to 1991. Chief Justice Venkataramayya, he overturned the earlier Supreme Court judgment based on the earlier House of Lords. So the misrepresentation concept also underwent change. If you study misrepresentation and bring it within 30 subsection 2, then this doctrine of commercial wisdom, the COC is the depository of commercial wisdom and adjudicatory authority is shut up to open its chips of mind chips to find out that no commercial wisdom is there. Then other remedies are there available, other ways are available. Even commercial wisdom in some of the cases may have to be questioned. Now, the liquidation, below the liquidation value, if the plan has come, that can also be approved. Supreme Court have now said. So earlier, my view strictly was that if it is below the liquidation value, then why COC prefer to go company accept a plan rather than allow the company to be liquidated and maximize the value by helping the creditor to realize more. So that Supreme Court has now let down that even adopting the logic that the company must survive, resolution, I don't know which principle is preferable to over which. So this is the wisdom of the superior courts. And one thing which I will take the opportunity to point out, the adjudicating authority NCLT has to be informed repeatedly that every bench of NCLT is not NCLT itself. There are doctrine of precedents. There are principle of stare decisis. There is hierarchy of courts. If appellate tribunal has taken a view, then adjudicating authority must take the view adopted by the appellate tribunal. Supreme Court view under Article 141 is binding on everybody. Appellate tribunal view is binding on the NCLT adjudicating authority. The larger bench of the NCLT view is binding on the smaller bench. If this doctrine of stare decisis is not followed, doctrine of precedent is not followed, we are heading towards a very serious problem. There has to be consistency. There has to be judicial discipline. I have been trying to drill in at various colloquium these principles, but the way things are happening now, I think whatever I said appears to have been forgotten. Dr. Chaudhary and my other colleagues, if find time and opportunity, it must be pointed out, because otherwise there cannot be. NCLT is one. The benches have to work with judicial discipline. So I took the opportunity, as I told Mr. Madan that I will say such a thing, because it sometime, see, I don't feel very good when I realize that what is going on is not strictly in accordance with judicial discipline.
On this information memorandum, one interesting question has come. I'm raising this question, and I think I would like Dr. Mamta to respond to this. That currently, in many cases, information memorandum is issued by RPs with a disclaimer clause advising the RA not to solely rely on the information memorandum and do their own due diligence. Is it permissible? What do you say? I don't find any merit in this.
It's not permissible, but of course, as RPs, people do it. As I was entailing earlier with the hat of the RP, now if you remove that hat from my head, I'll be actually a little free and maybe have a discourse. So definitely, it's not allowed. There's nothing in law which allows the RP to have disclaimers after disclaimers and issue a document. But having said that, that's the practice that has emerged over a period of time because of two major reasons. One, strict timelines. IRP, somebody is different. RP comes in and just have about 7 to 10 days to prepare an IM. So the handover is so unsmooth from the IRP to RP that you hardly get any time. So, you just try to pick up whatever you get and try to just document it. To permit me to say this, Mr. Pandey is also here and he will also understand. At times, RP or IRP does it just to save her skin from the wrath of the regulators, because at least you show that you've prepared a document and you've adhered to the timelines. As Mr. Chaudhary was also mentioning, that there are strict timelines. Everybody can go to the adjudicating authority and pray for time except the RP. So the RP just tries to, therefore, have a document, version 1, IM with all the disclaimers. But unfortunately, those disclaimers always finds a place and never gets removed from the document. So I think a lot of RPs have also joined in. So as you revise the document, I think, gradually you should view at removing the disclaimers, because then you get some time and you revise your versions, etc., etc. So to answer it precisely, in the beginning, of course, disclaimers find a place, but gradually the RP gets time, and therefore by then the disclaimers should not be finding a place at all in the document.
I'd like to add, yeah, Mr. Madan. Yeah,
you see,
so,
sorry.
Carry on, sir, please.
Now the regulation 36A, sub-regulation 8, while issuing expression of interest, RP is under obligation to do due diligence. And similarly, while preparing the memorandum of information, there is an obligation cast on the RP, statutory obligation. Disclaimer, etc. You see, these things emerge from one thing. There is a risk factor. Tomorrow, the RP may be sued by somebody, and I have been insisting on IBBI and Dr. Sahu that we must provide an insurance cover to all the RP, that in case they commit some unintentional lapse, they should be covered. Instead of writing these type of things, they feel insecure, you see. They feel very insecure. So in order to ensure that there is an insurance cover, the insurance cover would cover their negligence. If they have ignored one information to give, then that insurance cover may protect them. In England, these type of insurance covers are available to all the administrator. I am sure Ishan would bear me out in USA also. The administrator are covered by the insurance cover. So in India also, these type of cover should be widely available. Sorry, Mr. Sanjeev, kindly.
Yeah.
Only one opportunity before Sanjeev ji speaks. Sanjeev ji, एक मिनट के लिए चौधरी साहब बोल रहे थे थोड़ी देर पहले कि ममता जब एक बड़ा अकाउंट होता है, हाउ इज द आरए capable to do so much of due diligence? एक आरपी भी how will he be capable to do so much due diligence and bring it in the form of a document? You know, that is also something which we have to understand.
No, because he is RP.
नहीं कुमार साहब, मैं तो आरपी हूँ, तो इसलिए मेरे को बोलने का आई थिंक फ्रीडम भी है इस बारे में. मैं एक चीज और बोलना चाहती हूँ कि सर, जिस हिसाब से सीआरपी कॉस्ट पे इतना ज्यादा पकड़ है, you know, for a better word, I'm just using that. आप किसी को एम्प्लॉय नहीं कर सकते, आप किसी को लगा नहीं सकते, because what you do, you have to multiply your hands. If you cannot be simultaneously in 10 different places, you ultimately have to multiply. How do you do that if you don't give the money? So each cost that the RP, believe you me, sirs, each cost that the RP spends, each penny, it has to have a prior approval of the COC. You have cases where the valuer's fees are not approved by the COC.
You are opening the Pandora box for further discussion.
I have just 1 minute. I have all the sympathies with the IRPs and the RPs, but I may point out that please see section 18, 29 and regulation 35 and 36. All of them make it impermissible that you should cast upon a burden on a third party for your memorandum of information. Therefore, this disclaimer may come have as a precaution, but this is not permissible in view of section 18, section 29 and 35 and 36, the regulation made by IBBI.
Yes.
So you see all of them put together, it's a obligation. I have all the sympathies. That is why that this IRP and RP business is not done by the individuals in the Europe and America. It is done by the largest institutions in the insolvency and bankruptcy business. And they have the budget running into billions and billions and billions of dollars. They have more than 112 partners, even in the smallest possible, and largest as 1,200 partners.
Yes.
So I have all the sympathies with the individual IRPs and the RPs with very limited resources at their command. But then this limited resources command can't dilute the obligation of law.
Totally agreed, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was exactly what I wanted to say. In the IBC, RP has a very, very critical role, and he has been assigned certain jobs which he cannot outsource. So problem is coming basically from some of the RPs outsourcing the job of creation of IM to some outside agents. And then they want to put in a disclaimer because they don't know what is inside. So they will disclaimer that you take it at your cost. I treat IM exactly something akin to a prospectus in a public issue of equity, where it is a very sacrosanct document. So if under SEBI regulation, you issue a prospectus and you issue a public issue of equity, some wrong information is provided in the prospectus, so you are liable before law, you can be penalized. Similarly is the concept of IM under IBC. So whatever is written in the IM, it is the personal responsibility of the IP. And all the related risk are his job hazard. He has to accept it before accepting the job. As regard the timelines, in many cases where we go take the CD to court, to NCLT, and we appoint a IRP initially, and we continue with the same RP. So we suggest that you start from the date of application, filing of application in NCLT. You start preparing IM from that date. Why you wait for those 15 days or 20 days? You have like sometime, normally these NCLTs take 3 to 4 months in admission of an application. So you have that time and then further time of 3 months to prepare a IM. I think that is good enough. That is my view. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Sir, simultaneously, he has to face the regulator, also disciplinary committees of IP as well as IBBI also. I tell you, today only one of the IPs have received a show cause notice that why you have outsourced these services. You should have done all this with yourself, and you should not have debited this cost to the CD's account. Anyway, that's not a part of discussion for today. Over to Ishan.
Great. I think there's so much that's been discussed today that it makes way for another round of discussions altogether on a different date. I think we should all plan that. And speaking of RPs, I mean, mostly they're all walking on eggshells. You know, I think it's very difficult to be an RP. And I particularly recall that one day in courtroom when Justice Kumar had actually given this suggestion in court that, you know, RP should get together and seek a provision where they're actually allowed to take insurance to cover their tracks, because it's important. And I think the day will come, as Dr. Chaudhary said, that, you know, one after the other, and after the time we reach the full bench, the day will come that things will evolve. But till then, I think we need to keep having such discussions, such lively participation. And with that, first of all, I would really like to thank our audience, the participants who made this really engaging, who kept, you know, this dialogue really exciting through their Q&As and through the chats and through the polls. So thank you very much for taking out the time. And usually such webinars are for like 1 hour, 30 minutes. I think we're almost at 2 hour, 20-minute mark, which means it's been really exciting. That's why everyone is still here. So thank you very much for that. And thanks a lot to all the panelists. I would really like to thank each and everyone and your views. Justice Kumar, it's always a pleasure to hear you. Back then, when I left India, I think you were still there, but after I left, I got to know of your retirement, and I'm so glad that I could have this chance to hear your views, and I'm sure all the hundreds of people who attended today got that. And Dr. Chaudhary, again, it's a pleasure. Dr. Binani, again, fantastic views, wearing the RP's hat and otherwise. I think, you know, if you wear multiple hats, you can just choose which one you want to take for a particular view. And thank you for the kind words. And Mr. Pandey, I think all the RPs and all the bankers who were present today must be delighted to hear your pragmatic views and the, you know, the flexibility you had as a banker. I think that would be paving the way for a lot of future professionals, both young and the established ones. And if quickly, Dr. Mamta, if I can invite you on screen, I would really like for us to take a small little screenshot with our faces smiling, because every time I tried to take a screenshot, there was intensity on everyone's face while discussing. So if you can just have a small little screenshot, it would be amazing.
Ishan, would you like to share the poll results also?
Yes, I will just share it. I think if you can just quickly smile for a nice photo. Great, thank you. And for the polls, I did share some results. Initially, this was the first question that we'd asked, that do you think resolution plans should be allowed to be withdrawn? So 84% of the attendees said that yes, in some circumstances only should it be made permissible. But I think this was asked initially, and I'm sure they might have changed their answers by the end of the discussion. And another question that I'd asked was, can a resolution plan be made conditional? And 55% of the attendees said that yes, it should be allowed to be conditional if the COC approves. 1/4 of them said no, nothing in the law permits that. And then, of course, the convenient option, the AA should decide. Then there was this last question that I asked. Because the discussion was so intense, I didn't intend on asking too many poll questions because that would have diverted attention. And this was one question: can a resolution plan be modified? So 51% said yes, only by resolution applicant with the consent of the COC, or with the approval of the COC. 37% believed RA should have the right, depending on reasonable commercial feasibility. And 18% said yes, only the adjudicating authority should be allowed to modify it. So I think these percentages would keep on varying, but I'm sure today we've had some views that are quite clearly suggestive of what the way should be, and not necessarily all of us can be in a position to comment how you can actually go about with the law. But I think over the course of time, a lot of things that we discussed today would be implemented. And I think it's a great platform to advance those views, especially when we have so many different institutions coming together and talking about these issues. So again, for the umpteenth time, but essentially, thank you so much to all of you for joining, and thank you so much for your time. And we really look forward to having this again. And thank you so much to the attendees. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, GP. That was really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Kumar. Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Thank you, Sanjeev.
Thank you, GP.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary.